Welcome, everybody. We are back from our summer off from our CCLN monthly member meetups. I hope everyone enjoyed their summer as best they could. And we are excited to be back to hosting our monthly member meetup starting this month. So we are really excited today to be featuring the self-determination program. Just so that folks know, today's meeting is being recorded and it will be posted to the CCLN website for future viewing. And we will have a Q&A at the end. Our speakers have also said that they would entertain questions throughout the presentation. So please feel free to ask those questions either in chat or by raising your hand. And we'll certainly make sure that we get an opportunity to answer any questions that you folks have. So again, featuring the self-determination program with this year's statewide rollout of the self-determination program, I have heard from so many of our CCLN members who have wanted to learn more about self-determination. Some of our members are being approached to provide services to people in the self-determination program, and some of our members are already serving people in the self-determination program. So in response to that, we have a great presentation for you today. We've lined up two speakers for you. We have Judy Mark. Judy has a 23-year-old son with autism, which led her to become co-founder and president of Disability Voices United. Judy leads DVU's advocacy and programmatic efforts. Judy was instrumental in the passage of the self-determination law in 2013 and has been active in the implementation as a member of the DDS work group, chair of Westside Regional Center's local advisory committee, and a member of the statewide advisory committee. Judy has written and edited 2 books on self-determination program and has spoken extensively throughout California and trained thousands of individuals and families. So we're really happy today to have her here talking to providers. Also a faculty member at UCLA, Judy teaches undergraduate courses in disability studies. She leads the UCLA Autism Media Lab, which produced 7 short documentaries on the inclusion of people with non-speaking autism. Her past professional experience includes over 30 years with national policy organizations, most extensively focusing on immigrant and refugee rights. Judy has a BA from UCLA in Communications Studies and a master's in Politics and Public Policy Forum from the Eagleton Institute of Policy at Rutgers University, with coursework at the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton University. Judy lives in LA with her husband, attorney Alan Ehrenbaum, and son Joshua. And she visits her daughter Emma often at Bernard College at Columbia University in New York, where she is right now. So
I'm in New York right now. I had a bagel for breakfast.
Along with Judy, we're going to be hearing from Molly T. Kennedy. Molly Kennedy is a dynamic, entertaining presenter who has extensive experience presenting in many subject areas, including healthcare, homelessness, mental health, disability, etc. Molly also happens to be born with cerebral palsy. This disability brought many challenges growing up, but Molly was able to overcome many of them by learning to be a strong self-advocate. She chose not to be defined by her disability, but rather to seek out her abilities. And these skills eventually led to a master's degree in managed healthcare programs for special populations. Molly, also an advocate on the local, state, and federal levels to improve the lives of people with disabilities and other vulnerable populations. Most importantly, she inspires, motivates, and educates. She's currently a program fellow with Disability Voices United. So welcome to our 2 speakers, and we're just so happy to have you here so that you can tell our membership more about self-determination and how we can look forward to working together with our members and Disability Voices United. So with that, I will turn it over to Judy and Molly. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm really, really happy to be here. You all should know that we have worked closely with CCLN on a lot of really important policy issues over the past couple of years, and really have so many similar goals. So I'm really thrilled that we can come together around around the self-determination program, which is really at the core of the work that DVU does. So I'll just I have a whole PowerPoint, but I'll just give a couple minutes on Disability Voices United in case you've never heard of us before. We are an organization that's very new. We were founded in 2017 by a group of people with developmental disabilities and their family members. We started out very small. We're still actually quite small, but we started out really as a growth out of the self-determination movement in California. We were founded by a lot of the people who got the self-determination law passed in 2013, as well as others who've been leaders for many years, very experienced advocates like Connie and Harvey Lapin, who many of you might know, and others. We work on a range of issues. Our mission statement is that we advocate for choice and control over our lives, which includes obviously the self-determination program, as well as we are real experts in supported decision-making, which in case you don't know what that is, supported decision-making is an alternative to conservatorship in the state of California and also exists in states around the country. It takes the court out of people's lives and gives them alternative ways to protect them from any kind of abuse and fraud, but at the same time, it keeps the courts out of their lives and ensures that they have all of their civil and human rights. Our mission statement also includes that we advocate for meaningful outcomes that matter to us, and how this overlaps with a lot of the work that CCLN is doing is that, we call for things like rates to be tied to outcomes, provider rates to be tied to outcomes. We also call for regional centers funding to be tied to outcomes as well. And when we say outcomes, these are outcomes that matter to us. We have been saying since our founding that we don't want to confuse compliance with outcomes, that just checking a box that a service provider showed up is not the same thing as checking a box and saying that person got a job or that person is living a healthy life in the community. Our third advocacy area is equitable systems. And as most of you I'm sure know, certainly the regional center system is not at all equitable. We know that Latinos receive about half the amount of services as whites, and African Americans and Asians also suffer from levels of disparities. And we issue reports on that. We advocate in various ways, and we run leadership training projects to provide the leadership skills for people of color who are self-advocates and family advocates to take more leadership roles in their regional centers as well as in the state. And then finally, our last sort of mission area is systems that are accountable to us. For us, we have really significant concerns that the regional center system lacks accountability. We also have concerns that DDS lacks accountability at times. And so we are really, we are looking at ways and sponsor legislation or support efforts statewide to hold these systems accountable to us. So that's sort of a little bit about DVU. We're here to talk more about the self-determination program. And I'm gonna, so the presentation that we're about to give is one that I worked on. I haven't given this presentation in several years, mostly because I think providers have not been that interested in being part of the self-determination program. And I think it's to their detriment that they're not interested, because I believe that self-determination is the wave of the future for our system. It is the true way that people have civil rights, that people with disabilities have their civil rights, and that they live lives as close to people without disabilities. So I haven't given this presentation, and I literally I'm Jewish, so I was celebrating Yom Kippur, and so I had to kind of rush this out. So I'm hoping that there's not too many typos in it. Molly found a few right in the last hour. So we'll give this presentation, but we will definitely have time for questions at the end. But if somebody has a question during it, we're more than happy to take a question during the presentation. I'm not sure how you normally do it, Mark, but we're happy for you to use the raise hand feature. When we're sharing screen, we're not going to be able to see you personally. So using the raise hand feature, which you'll find on your screen under reactions, you'll see I'm doing it right here. I'm raising my hand and now I can lower my hand. That would be the best thing for us, is if you use the raise hand feature. You can also type your questions in the chat and we'll try to address those as well. All right, so let's get started. Hold on, let me find the presentation, go to the beginning, and there we go. And let me share the screen. Make sure I have the right one. I believe I do. And now, hold on, I have to, there we go. Sorry, need to go to slideshow and play from start. Okay. All right. So, this presentation is very specifically for you. This is not, while there is some similar language to what we say when we train self-advocates and family members, we've really tried to target this specifically towards service providers and the questions that you may have about the self-determination program. Just want to point out and give a shout out to Sydney Edmonds, who painted the cover of we have a manual. We have a couple of different books about self-determination, and I could put the link to our website in the chat. And you are welcome to purchase our books. We have 2 books, one called Thinking Outside the Box. It's a self-determination manual. It's quite big and it has everything you'd ever need about the self-determination program. It was just updated this year. We have a second book that is a plain reader on self-determination called Profiles in Self-Determination. It's the story of people who've been in the self-determination program for the last 25 years, as well as stories of people who've entered the program with real examples of their budgets and the things that they're doing in their lives. Oops, so let me, okay, there we go. So first, I just want to make the point that this law was passed by people with disabilities and their family members. This did not come from DDS. This was not imposed on us. It certainly was not imposed by regional centers. Regional centers, in fact, fought the bill, tried to kill the bill. ARCA literally tried to kill the bill. So you know that it's been an uphill battle for us to get it implemented. But this is a group of folks from around the state, self-advocates and family members. The author of the bill is the big tall guy on the right, named Bill Emerson, who is a Republican senator from the San Bernardino area, Inland Empire. And he retired. He left the legislature a month after our law passed because he was very frustrated with the partisanship within the legislature. He's one of these rare moderate Republicans who actually now, I believe, is an independent, but he has been incredible in staying with us and helping to get the self-determination law implemented, sorry. So you see that the law was signed by Governor Brown in 2013, and it just went statewide this year. So it has been a long road. So really, as an overview, what is the self-determination program? So participants in the self-determination program have choices over their lives, choices that do not exist in the traditional system. They can choose their services and supports. They are not told, here is the very minor, tiny list of services that you get here that we fund at the regional center. The world is their oyster. They really get to have lots and lots of choices. They also get to choose the staff that help them. They get the authority to hire and fire people, which is really, really important. They choose where they go in the community. So instead of being part of a group day program where they go in groups and you may walk in the morning and they say, oh, you can go to the park or you can go to the bowling alley. And if you don't want to do either the park or the bowling alley, oh well, you really get to choose where you go and what you do every day, as long as it's in the community. And they get to choose who they spend time with. You know, one of the big issues that we always hear is, you know, I don't want to be in a program where everybody's got a disability. You get to go to community-based programs. You get to choose the people you want to spend your day with, and not be forced, you know, here is you're going to be your partner for the day. This is not kindergarten. This is a way that people can really live a very person-centered life in their community. It's really important to understand that this is a paradigm shift for our entire system. It's going to be a paradigm shift even for you who are really progressive providers. Things are going to be very different. The individual, the participant is in charge of their own life, completely in charge. Nobody's telling them what to do every day. And that is a very big change in the way our system works. Everything's got to be person-centered. Now, you're hearing this person-centered buzz all around because there's a federal rule requiring person-centered processes and planning. Everybody's getting all this money to do, you know, person-centered thinking, training, and all this stuff. You know, my feeling is the traditional system, it is not possible to truly be person-centered, because person-centeredness means you get to choose who you have in your life every single day. And in the traditional system, that's a very, very hard thing to do. So we believe that the only way to truly be person-centered is to be in the self-determination program. People will have their circles of support. Their circles of support will include people who are paid to be in their circle and a lot of people who are not paid to be in their circle. And that these circles of support will help them through annual person-centered planning, through helping them achieve their goals and their hopes and their dreams. And it is, the circle support is a very critical part of the self-determination program. The other thing that's really important is that self-determination is about a person's strengths and not their deficits. I'm sure, well, I'm not sure all of you have been to an IPP, but if you've ever been to an IPP at a regional center, it is completely deficits based. It is all about what the person can't do as opposed to what the person can do. And because that's the way our system runs, it's the way the school system runs in special education, it's the way the regional center system runs. Person-centered planning and the self-determination program looks at the person's strengths, looks at their interests, looks at what's exciting to them, and then builds on that and says, what kind of life can this person have based on all that? Not, oh, this person, we need to fix this person. We need to correct this person. This person has all these behaviors. This person has all these problems and we need to fix them. That's not what the system is about. I would say that from the regional centers, this paradigm shift is very, very hard for them. I was just at a recent meeting with my regional center where my son is part of the self-determination program, where I was saying to the head of the self-determination program, you know, my son doesn't care about that. You know, this thing you want to fix on him, he doesn't care about that. That's not a priority to him. And he goes, yeah, but we have to make him better. Like, what are we going to do to correct this? And I said, he doesn't want it corrected. So why are you even thinking that way? So it's a very, very different way of a thought process. The other big paradigm shift is that there's no requirement to use vendors in the self-determination program, with the exception of one vendor, which is called the Financial Management Service, the FMS, which I'll explain a little bit more later about. But obviously, as a vendor, you are a vendor. You need to realize that now there is a broader competition for people's service delivery. It is traditional service providers competing against the general marketplace to be able to provide these services to these participants. And so we have to figure out a way that you have these traditional service providers who are, some of whom, like you, are providing excellent service delivery, and you have years and years of experience working with people with disabilities. How do you then compete in that marketplace where somebody could just go and hire somebody directly from the local college or by advertising somewhere, or they could go to the local church and hire someone there, or they could participate in community-based programming. The other big thing, this is the big problem with regional centers, is that the system has to fit the individual instead of the individual fitting the system. You know, that's how come we call our book Thinking Outside the Box, because the system is a box. And when you go in and you say, okay, but I don't fit into your box, the services and supports that I need don't fit in your box. The system has to be able to say, okay, because it's not about our box, it's about you. It's about you living your life. And so I'll tell a little story about that. I was talking to a regional center associate executive director, who's now an executive director of a different regional center, a few years back. And he was so, his thinking was so completely traditional and uniform and non-creative. And I said to him, my God, you know, you got to think outside the box here for your consumers. And he said, but I like the box. And I said, well, that's the problem, because the box doesn't work for most people. I'm sure there's a small subset, but liking the box doesn't matter, because we have to think about what's going to work for that individual. So it's the system that is why it's taken us 8 years to implement this program, because the system doesn't like thinking outside the box. The other thing, and this is a lot of parents have been having this problem with this paradigm shift, is that individuals are not in programs in the self-determination program. They are in they have lives. So I just my friend the other day sent me a text going, what program is your son in through the self-determination program? And I'm like, my son is not in a program. He has no programs. He lives his individualized life, and he wakes up every morning and decides what he wants to do. He has certain requirements that he needs to do. He has some work requirements. He has some, commitments. I should not say requirements. They're commitments that he's made. He's signed up for some classes, but he lives the same kind of life that we all do, where if we change our mind, we do something else. We don't have to ask permission from 5 different people. People are not in programs. And mostly, and finally, and most importantly, if individuals are part of their communities, they are citizens in their communities, they are contributors to their communities. And what's very important in self-determination is we try to figure out ways for people with disabilities to have that basic human right to be able to contribute to their community. And that is not something that is really offered in the traditional system that much. It really is more like, what can you take from the community as opposed to what can you give? And we talk a lot about giving back. Oh, and the final one, I thought that was the final one, sorry, is that we aspire that the participants live lives like people without disabilities do. So you're not asking permission to have to go to the bathroom when you're in a program all day. You're not having to do things you don't like to do because the program says you have to do it. You are really, really living a great life that makes you happy. And if the thing you decided you wanted to do is not making you happy anymore, you can go and change your mind, just like we all do. I'm going to now turn it over to my colleague Molly Kennedy to go through the principles.
So when the self-determination was developed, they came up with 5 principles that really reflect what self-determination is. And these are things that not only do people with disability want, it's what everyone wants in their own life. So these 5 principles are freedom, and that's freedom to make their own decisions. So that's where you live, where you work, who you hang out with, where you want to go in the future, what goals do you want to have. It's you deciding these things for yourself. Authority, this is very different than the traditional regional center system. Is that if they just tell you what program or what services and they pay for it. Now, in self-determination, you get, excuse me, and we're gonna talk about how this is done, but you get a sum of money and you get to decide how you want to spend that money. So I get a sum of money for my self-determination. Sorry, of course this happened. And I spend it on independent support and employment and things that are helpful and meaningful to my life. And that's where I get to decide how the money should be spent, because I know what is best for me. Supports. I get to decide who will support me and who will help me and who will I go out with on Friday night. So I'm too old to go out on Friday night, but it's my choice who I want to be with, and I want to be supported by people who understand me and work with me, and it's not just a job to them. But with this authority and support, there is responsibility that I have to make sure I'm accountable for the decisions I make. If I make bad decisions, how do I fix those? Am I spending the funding in the right way that is within the regulations, and making sure I don't overspend? And then the recognition that all individuals have the right to make decisions over their own lives, even those that have very difficult disabilities. Everyone has a way to say, this is what I want in my life. And so these are the 5 principles that drive self-determination.
Okay, I'm going to go to the difference between the traditional system and the self-determination program, and chime in here, Molly, whenever you want to. So in the traditional system, the regional center generally offers services and the providers. So you go into an IPP and the regional center says, well, based on your disability, we are willing to give you 10 hours of respite a month, and we're willing to give you a day program from 10 to 2 and some independent living services, 1 hour a week or something like that. And then we say, okay, okay, so those are the 3 services we're giving you. And boy, you're lucky if you're getting those 3 services. In some cases, you're getting 0 services, but you get those 3 services, even if they're not appropriate. And okay, so you want a day program. These are the 3-day programs that you have your choices of. And they're all congregate, and you don't like any of them. That's exactly what happened to my son, actually, is that when he left school, he was offered 3 very, very congregate, highly segregated day programs that never left the center. And my son hated all of them. And even though he's not very verbal, I understood his communication when he sat there for 5 minutes and then walked out the door. That behavior is communication. In self-determination is not like that. You decide what your services are and who provides them. It's so totally different. In the traditional system, you only use regional center vendors. Everybody must have a contract with the regional center. As you know, because you're all vendors, there's a lot of groups out there that don't want to become vendors at the regional center because of the incredible bureaucracy that exists. And then you may be a vendor at one regional center, and to get the guest vendorship at the second regional center is like such a freaking nightmare. I know this because DBU is a vendor at many regional centers, and the paperwork can be quite onerous. In self-determination, there's no vendorship required. You basically use the FMS, and the FMS, you send an invoice to the FMS and the FMS pays you. You have to provide them with some really basic paperwork like a W-9 at the beginning of working for that participant, but that is about it. In the traditional system, services are monitored by the regional center. You know, in every regional center, they have a quality assurance department. I'm not really sure what the quality assurance department does at most regional centers, because I have seen a lot of very, very poor quality of service providers. My son was abused right in front of me. He was hit by a service provider literally right in front of me when he was little. And that service provider is continuing to provide services to people. And I have to see that service provider who hit my son at meetings. So I'm not sure what quality assurance does. With the self-determination program, participants and families monitor the service. So if somebody comes in and hits my kid, that person is not only kicked out the door, they are never, no one from their agency or anyone associated with them is allowed to come back into my home. In the traditional system, you have little flexibility on the services and who provides them. You know, this is not really all the regional centers' fault. The legislature, because of budget cutbacks in previous years, have really limited the kinds of services that regional centers are allowed to pay for. But with self-determination, you'll see that there's a gazillion different kinds of programs that people can choose from. In the traditional system, the regional center pays the vendor, but in the self-determination program, the FMS pays invoices approved by the participant. So we'll dig deeper into this right now. So did you want to add something? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just would say, like, for me personally, so I would lost my ability to walk about 6 years ago, and then from not needing regional center services, I needed them. And so I started under transitional services with independent living. But these independent living services did not really help me much, because they came in and they're like, okay, we're gonna teach you how to do laundry. And I was like, I've been doing laundry for over 40 years. Like, I don't need to be taught. I can't do laundry because I can't get to the washer. Well, that's what we do in traditional. We can't do it for you. When I transferred into self-determination, it was like, okay, I can't do laundry, so I'm gonna hire someone to do my laundry for me. I can't organize this, so I can hire. It was a very different shift of, we're here to teach you to, okay, what do you need done so your life is easier during the day? So I just thought I'd give you that example of what the differences are now that I'm in self-determination program.
Thank you. That was really, really helpful. Putting the human face on self-determination. All right, so we're going to quickly go through how the self-determination program works. This is sort of the path. It starts with person-centered planning. People can hire what's called an independent facilitator to support them in their planning process. You develop your individual budget. You work with the financial management services and you create a spending plan, And the ultimate thing is you go to an IPP meeting and enter the self-determination program after there's agreement with the regional center. So let's start with person-centered planning. Let's go, I'm going to put them all up. Why don't you go through this rather quickly, Molly? Because I think a lot of folks do know about this because you probably do it in your own work, but go ahead, Molly.
Well, person-centered planning is just a plan about the individual, about what they want to do with their life. It's about their hopes and dreams. It's about what they want to do, how they want to live their lives, what they find meaningful. And so it's just a process of planning a meeting, having your support circle come together, talk about what you want to do, how you can do it, and then creating a plan. And later on, we'll talk about the key thing about person-centered planning and self-determination is the goals that you come up with from person-centered planning, because those will help build your self-determination plan.
Thank you. All right, so, and we can get more into self-determination, to person-centered planning if people have questions, but I think a lot of folks know about how that planning works. You know, it's not a, I think there's a lot of really bad person-centered planning happening out there, but we'll talk about that. Okay, people can hire what's called an independent facilitator to help them with their planning process. So what is an independent facilitator? So an independent facilitator is an individual or an organization that a self-determination participant and their family can bring on. There's they can have many responsibilities. One of them is to lead the person-centered planning process. They can write up the person-centered plan. They also can help identify the people and providers to support them, the services, the activities and items. I try not to use too many traditional services words like goods. You know, nobody uses the word goods when you buy things. You're buying things, or you're buying items. So we talk about the activities, classes, the community-based activities people want. They help them develop their individual budget amount, which you'll hear what that is in a moment. And they can advocate for them at their IPP. That's the game changer for self-determination. So many individuals or families walk in to the IPP alone and get very frustrated. They now have this opportunity to have funding from the regional centers that allow them to bring in an advocate with them. And that advocate is supposed to be an expert on the self-determination program and understand how it works and help guide them through the IPP process. I was just this morning in an IPP for a friend of mine, not as his advocate, but as a friend. He brought his 2 independent facilitators with him, and we got him everything that he asked for in his self-determination program. So that's the really, really critical thing, is to have that support. The other thing is that you can also hire an independent facilitator to help you manage your workers. I mean, one of the things that a lot of people express is that they're overwhelmed with all the things, all the people that are coming in and out of their home, and they don't like being the boss sometimes if the person shows up late. You know, some of these people are their own employers of the workers. In other cases, they're using an agency. When you use an agency, the great thing an agency offers is that we could fire them. We're the ones that stay on top of the HR issues around the employee. Some people choose to hire their own workers directly, and so sometimes they might want to have an independent facilitator help to manage them. By the way, you all can become independent facilitators. I mean, that can certainly be a role that you play as service providers, and I'll give you some of the parameters. So, so first of all, I should just say that the independent facilitator is not a required service for the self-determination participant. Although when people ask me, I always strongly recommend it for their first year that people are moving in and when there's big change in a person's life. I have a lot of parents that just saw it on Facebook this morning. It's like, I created my son's IPP, no, sorry, PCP, sorry. I created my son's person-centered plan and the regional center said it was so great, I should become a professional. And I was like, well, that just shows you that the regional center and you do not understand self-determination, because it's supposed to be truly person-centered, and a parent is not the same thing as the person. I mean, I always say it's a family-centered plan when it's a small child. You know, a 5-year-old is not going to be able to really decide what their future is going to be. A typical 5-year-old couldn't decide that. But when you're talking about an older teen and certainly adults, a parent shouldn't be making decisions for that adult. It really should be truly person-centered, and the best way to do that is to hire an outside person. The self-determination participant can get funds to move into the program before they go in. They're called 024 funds. That's the rate code. That's the service code 024. And they get up to $2,500 to spend on all of those things you saw of doing their helping them advocate for a robust budget, helping them create their spending plan, helping lead their person-centered plan, co-lead their person-centered planning meetings and the process. And those funds can be used for with traditional service providers. I have seen this happening in a lot of places around the state. The independent facilitator, once you get into the self-determination program, you have to have a line item within your budget. Your budget does not get increased once you're in the program to have an independent facilitator. So you have to be able to leave room for that. The reason the term is called independent facilitator is because that person cannot have any conflict of interest. So that means they cannot be providing them with other services. So the reason that we put this in the law back in 2013 is because we didn't want agency ABC to say, yes, we're your independent facilitator and we are recommending that you do these services and that we provide all these services for you. There needs to be a big wall between the person who's helping you through your planning process and those agencies and individuals who are actually providing those services. There must be a giant wall. The other thing is that people can use their service coordinator for free as their independent facilitator just for the planning purposes alone. I honestly don't know a single person who's done that yet. I'm sure that over time, there will be better educated service coordinators who really understand the self-determination program and that people have a trust in them that they will be able to do this. I think it's very conflicted since the service coordinator is going to be there for you as the gatekeeper and deciding on your budget. But I do believe that there are some people who will have their service coordinator serving the role of leading their person-centered planning process. Oops, hold on. There we go. All right, so moving on to the individual budget. So what is an individual budget? So the individual budget is the amount of money a participant has to purchase their services, their activities, and their items in the self-determination program. It is only a dollar amount. In the original law, there was a confusion, and so they split. So DDS changed the law just this year so that there is an individual budget, and then you'll hear about the spending plan. The individual budget is just a dollar amount. That amount starts based on what has been spent on that individual over the last 12 months. Now that budget can be changed, but it is based only on services in the traditional system because the budget must be certified to so that the regional center says, yes, we would have spent this on this consumer in the traditional system. So how do you change it? There's two ways you can change the budget. The first is called change in circumstances. And this is very clear cut. Their life has changed, so they need more money and possibly even less money to meet their goals. So what are some examples of changes that would require a change in the budget or the services in the traditional system? Things like you're aging out of school, you lost a job, so you're going to be home more. You got very sick, so you need maybe some nursing services. You moved out of your parents' home. COVID, to me, is the big one that everybody talks about now as a change in circumstances, that children are now home or were home for the last 18 months from school, and parents needed more support in the home, especially those parents who work full-time out of their home. The second way to change the individual budget amount is something called unmet needs. Now, unmet needs is a little bit harder to make the case of, although I'm seeing people making it all over the state. You basically have to show that the needs were not being met in the traditional regional center system. Not that their needs were not met just in the self-determination program, but in the traditional system. So that means that you have to look at what are the services that a regional center provides a traditional consumer, and what about those services were you not getting? Were you not getting some of those services? Were those needs were never identified? Or were those services offered to you, but you could never utilize those services for various reasons? So one, big examples are, let's say you were offered a day program, but the day programs were full in your area, or you were offered behavioral therapy, but there were no behavioral agencies with any openings. So that there's a wait list. So you've identified that need at a previous IPP, but you could never actually get any of those services. It may be that you were offered a specific provider and that provider doesn't speak your language. Or you may have been provided a service that was not appropriate for you, or that was highly segregated and you don't want to be in a segregated program, or too far from home. Well, one of the prime examples I use when I talk about unmet needs is a woman that I know who has a son who was authorized social skills therapy. She had a 5-year-old son with autism who was offered social skills therapy, and she had the child had a 2-year-old baby sibling, and the parent didn't have a car, and so they would have to, and it was 12 miles away from them in Los Angeles County, and they had to take 2 buses, which took an hour and a half to get the kid to a program that lasted an hour, and then they had to take the bus an hour and a half back with the little baby in tow. And the mother showed up one time with her kid and said, we're never using that again. So that's an example where she would make the case at her son's budget meeting by saying, this is an identified need, that my son needs social skills, and yet the service you provided me could not be utilized, and therefore I want the funding for that service to be provided in my budget, or my son's budget. And then that kid, instead of using a service that is an hour and a half away from them, could be going to their local church, to their local Boys and Girls Clubs, their local YMCA, and offering those same kinds of social opportunities for them, but without all those problems of getting there, because it's someplace they can walk to. I see a chat, but I just want to make sure that we are not missing any questions. Okay, some of these we will get to in a little bit. Okay, all right, I will get to those questions in a little bit. Okay.
Perfect. Thanks, Judy. I was monitoring them, and I posted. We'll definitely get all these answered.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Mark. If one of them comes up where it's a question that needs to kind of be answered before we move on, then chime in, okay?
Absolutely, will do.
All right, so the next step in this is the financial management services. So what is the FMS? The FMS, I just realized that my little thing is, oh, well, just ignore that. The Disability Voices United went on top of the FMS lady. Anyway, the FMS is the only vendored agency that exists within the self-determination program. There are probably about 10 of them throughout California, and probably more will come in. Some of them are very, very familiar names to you because they've been working as respite provider or provider agencies or FMSs in other contexts. And some of them are brand new to the state of California. They're national FMSs who work on the self-determination program in other states and have come into California to provide this service. So the FMS are these sort of financial agencies that get money from the regional center to pay for those services, activities, and items that the participant wants to purchase. They are required by regulation, by state regulation, to tell the consumer, the participant, how much they have spent every month and how much they have left in their budget to ensure that people do not overspend. They check so every worker, you'll see in a little bit, has to check their background and qualifications, and the sort of thumbs up or thumbs down of those background checks goes to the FMS. They are also they pay the taxes for the workers. There are actually 3 kinds of FMSs. There's one that just basically is called bill payer, where they just pay the agencies and for classes and items, but they are not ever an employer. The person's never hiring their own staff. There's also the co-employer model, where the FMS and the self-determination participant share the employer of record responsibilities. And then there's the sole employer model, where the participant is the sole employer of record, and but the FMS still makes sure that all of the payroll taxes and everything get paid for. I had mentioned background checks. This is important for you to know in case you are providing services through the self-determination program, that all staff who provide direct support for the participant must submit to a background check that is specific for the self-determination program. So I'm sure that all of your staff already have a background check that they've done. Well, unfortunately, I don't know why this is the case, but they have to get another one that is submitted specifically to the California State Department of Justice, and the results go to the FMS agency. It's really kind of a bummer because the staff have to pay for their own background checks. But once you have a background check in the self-determination program, even if you end up working for other participants, you don't have to have that background check again. Unless, of course, the participant asks you. A participant can request a background check from any of their service providers, regardless of whether they're providing direct support. Remember that the cost of the background check is paid by the person undergoing the check or their agency, not by the person's budget. All right, moving on to the spending plan. So what is that? The spending plan.
Judy, can I ask a quick question that was relevant to that
Sure.
that topic? If a self-determination participant came to an agency and wanted services, is that a cost that they could then put into what the services would cost? Is the cost of the background checks for staff?
It actually cannot be put in.
Okay.
It's very, very frustrating, and we should change this part of the law. But when the law was passed, DDS required us to say that the cost of the background check must be paid for by the employee. So yeah, it cannot be paid for by the person's self-determination budget.
But an agency could reimburse that employee if they had someone seeking traditional services. It could be a reimbursement, but
you would have to sort of hide it within the agency's fees because you couldn't go to the FMS and say, oh, we added $75 here to reimburse this employee for their background check, because the FMS will not pay it.
Gotcha. Okay, good to know.
All right, good question. Spending plan. All right, so the spending plan is the actual way you're going to spend the money. So remember, the individual budget is just a dollar amount. It's a dollar amount based on the services you would get if you were in the traditional system. The spending plan, though, is how you're going to spend the money. And it details exactly how you're going to do it to the penny, to the actual penny. You have to assign amounts to different services. If you are going to have 3 staff making X amount per hour, you have to include all their payroll taxes, liability insurance, workers' comp, all that kind of stuff in your line items. And you have to include the cost of the FMS and the independent facilitator. When you're back at the earlier stage where you're negotiating your individual budget, they don't add any extra money for any of those things. That money, your dollar amount is based on what you would get in the traditional system, and the traditional system, all of that stuff is included except for the FMS and independent facilitator, and that's something that you have to make sure you have enough money left in your spending plan. So let's talk about what those services are. What kinds of services can someone purchase in the self-determination program? Well, there's actually a federal waiver specifically on the self-determination program, which is 26 pages of approved services. Everything from literally massage therapy. No, I can't remember massage therapy. I think that's in there. I know that acupuncture, it goes from A to Z. Acupuncture is the first one. And so I know you cannot get acupuncture in the traditional system. So right off the bat, you're getting to do new and cool things. It also includes these really general service types called community integration services, which are things like somebody to take me to church on Sunday morning, or somebody to help me find a date, or someone to, or taking a class at the local community college. So anything that allows you to be a full participant in your community is this general kind of community integration services. And then there's a second piece, which is called participant directed goods and services, which are, you can make the case that all of those, this is a critical service that you need, and it doesn't fit into any of the other services. I really have to say that I have not found a single service that anybody has asked for that we have had to use the participant directed goods and services, because you could really make the case for everything you'd want. The key thing is that people have to purchase these services, items, these supports. The DDS hasn't come out with this particular directive yet, but it's imminently coming out, because I sit on an advisory group for them. That all of these things have to be related to the person's disability or physical activity to keep them healthy in the community. So there has been an interest in people doing things like adding onto their house, putting a swimming pool in their backyard. I mean, these are not things that are going to get approved at all. People also believe that they're trying to get like passes to Disneyland or Universal Studios. I know that DDS is not high on those. I personally see lots of reasons why it's a small expense, why it's a good thing. But you know, those are not directly related to the person's disability. And even though you could make a case that you walk 10 miles around Disneyland, those kinds of, you know, pure entertainment kinds of things, I think are going to be harder to get approved in the future. They want them to be sort of therapeutic, physical in nature. So like my son is joining a gym with the self-determination program. So obviously the gym is not related to his disability, and the gym is something that anybody could go to. It's not a segregated gym, which it can't be anyway, but that's not a problem because it's related to his health. It's really important for you to know that regional centers do not approve the spending plan. They only review it. Hold on, I'm going to repeat this again. I just realized I forgot to take this out. So let me go to the next. Oh yeah, I'm going to say this in a little bit. So ignore the last two bullets, because I will say it again at some point. So all of you, I'm hoping all of you know what the HCBS final rule is. I know that Mark works a hell of a lot of time on it. I've actually learned a lot about it from Mark. So, while everyone has to implement this, all traditional service providers must implement this by March of 2023. Because the self-determination program is on a new federal waiver, they must follow the final rule immediately. So that means that if you are providing services, or if a person is receiving services in a setting that is segregated, it is going to receive that same heightened scrutiny in the self-determination program that it will receive at some point in the future in the traditional system. So they cannot be in isolated settings. The person has to be able to have, you know, complete access to the community at all times. So that means that if they go to a group work program and everybody has to stay in this big box all day of a house or a building, that is not going to be allowed in the self-determination program. Of course, it's not going to be allowed in the traditional system either. And, you know, it just basically, what does community mean in a community setting? It means that you spend most of the time you are getting services around non-disabled people who are not paid to be with you. So that means you're not sitting in a room for a day program all day where everybody has a developmental disability and the only non-disabled people are people who are paid to be there. That's just not going to fly anymore. Another rule is the regional center is still the payer of last resort. Like the traditional system, they still have to try to get other agencies to pay first. So that includes things like the generic resources of school districts, insurance, Medi-Cal, Department of Rehabilitation, and IHSS. All those generic resources still have to be in play. Now, we've been hearing a lot of regional centers coming down on this, and the thing that's so important is that there's such a way to get around this is to just not call the service what it's called in the traditional system or in the generic resources. So let's say you have a behavioral agency that you think would be great in helping the person learn how to date, you learn sort of the social skills of dating. Don't call them behavioral therapy. Just say, you know, they're a matchmaker or they're a social, that they're helping me build relationships in the community, or they're helping me understand romance. That is a very different thing than behavioral therapy. So that's how you don't trigger the generic resources rule in the way you call it. Now, what is the role of regional centers? So the role of regional centers to me is very limited. However, as we talked about at the very beginning in the paradigm shift, regional centers are not accustomed to the new rules of the self-determination program. And when I say the rules, I mean the unwritten rules that we're in charge of our lives, that people with disabilities are in charge of their lives. And so regional centers have no authority to approve or not approve a spending plan. They only review them. They are not supposed to micromanage the spending plan in any way, meaning I have on my spending plan that I want to hire a person to help me understand romance and so that I can go out on dates and maybe get married someday. And I'm willing, I have the money in my budget and I'm willing to pay someone $100 an hour to help me with this. The regional center is not allowed to say, why are you paying so much? That seems too high. Because as long as your spending plan does not exceed the amount of money that's in your budget, then the regional centers have to keep their mouth shut about this stuff. Now, that doesn't mean that that's what's happening. We are seeing regional centers micromanaging spending plans every day, multiple times a day. It's basically the only thing I spend my time on anymore is advising people with, no, the regional center is not allowed to tell you that. So there are no rates in the spending plan. There's no rates in the self-determination program. So if you decide you want to spend X amount of money per hour on a person, that is your choice as long as you don't overspend your individual budget. The only thing that the regional center is actually allowed to do is to ask questions and to review to ensure that services, activities, and items meet these 3 requirements we've already gone over. Number 1, is the service part of the federal waiver? Number 2, did you use your generic resources first? And number 3, do they comply with the HCBS final rule? Those are the only 3 things they're allowed to review. And what we're seeing is that they're really putting up a lot more barriers, and they're not approving a lot of things. Because they're taking the role of approving things when they don't actually have the role of that. And then finally, to finish up, what does an IPP meeting look like in the self-determination program? Just so that you understand the process of what we're all going through. So the person brings their person-centered plan and their spending plan to meetings. There's likely to be more than one. In most cases, you have at least 2, one on determining the budget amount and one on presenting your spending plan. Sometimes you have more than one of each of these in order to explain what's going on or to negotiate on the budget. You have to show why if you need more money as a participant, and this is where the independence facilitator can help. And the regional center is there to support them to be as healthy and safe as possible, but the participant gets to choose who helps them and how they live their life. So it's a very different power shift, which we are yet to see actually fulfilled. So finally, and I'm sorry I'm dominating this, so chime in, Molly, whenever you want to say something. I wanted to sort of pitch to all of you how is the self-determination program an opportunity for traditional service providers. It's that, first of all, you get to provide services that don't fit into the regional center vendor category. So, I've talked to providers of behavioral therapy who say, God, you know what I'd love to be doing? I'd love to be helping this client learn gymnastics. Which, why is gymnastics having anything to do with behavior? It's because they know as behaviors how to break down the steps of gymnastics and to help them keep their body calm while they're learning gymnastics. But that's not normally something that a behaviorist could do. Or it may be that you're a supported living provider that also wants to help with a particular consumer at their job. So you could absolutely negotiate a contract with that, or it's not really a contract, but an agreement with the self-determination participant that you provide supported living services, for some of the days. And then on the days that this person goes to work, you also help them with a staff to go to their job with them. You don't have to sit and negotiate that with the regional center. You negotiate the rates and fees. There are no rates. So you decide with the self-determination participant and family what it is that you want. There is significantly lower administrative costs for you in that you're not dealing with the same level of bureaucracy with an FMS that you are and the participant that you are with the regional center. Yeah, go ahead.
Let me say that when I transitioned into self-determination, I still wanted to use my independent skilled services from my agency. But what we did was they gave me different levels of rates. Like $45 was, they would give me like all the paperwork and keep track of everything. Mm-hmm. And then like $37 was, they just don't do paperwork. They, you don't have to, keep track of anything. Mm-hmm. And so it was negotiated. And of course, I took the $37 rate an hour because I didn't need a report about myself. You
already know about yourself.
Yeah. So, so it was easy to transfer what we were doing in traditional into self-determination.
Yeah.
Cheaper for me and less work for the agency itself.
That's a great, great example. I can tell you that none of the service providers who work for my son are ever writing a report for me. But what I do pay them to do is show up to team meetings, that will happen maybe a couple of times a year. So it's not a lot of meetings, but it is really important for my son's nutritionist to also be in a meeting where she's talking to his personal trainer, because my son has some health issues. And so, let's all get on the same page. And at that same meeting is a behavioral advisor to say, okay, Josh, how do we motivate you? And Josh is part of all of his team meetings. My son is a part of all of his team meetings. And so, we don't want any written reports. We don't need any of that. I personally, in the traditional system, never even got to see the reports written about my son. So here, let me give you another example. The great benefit is that you're not billing the regional center. So I happen to know a lot about the e-billing system and what a freaking nightmare it is, and how it takes like sometimes months to actually get paid by the regional center, and you're owed so much money. FMSs pay every 2 weeks. They pay you every 2 weeks. And by the way, FMSs get paid every 2 weeks by the regional center. They get paid more frequently than you do as traditional service providers, because it's in the self-determination law. So you're not putting out as much money, you're getting paid more promptly, you're not writing reports. So there's a lot less bureaucracy for you. You're also, the key thing is you're accountable to the participants and families who provide the quality assurance. So you're competing in a typical marketplace, which I think is a good thing, because competition is always a good thing for service delivery.
And I've had through a regular agency, the good thing about it is they send me someone and I try them out. And it has been in the past 2 years that 2 people, they were set in the old way of doing services. So they were like helping me. They were like, well, watch you do it. And I was like, that's not what I'm paying you to do. I'm not here to be watch a show for you to watch. But I was able, through a vendor who I get my services, just to say, I didn't care for this person. And they were like, all right, we'll go find someone else for you. So even with a regular vendor, I still get to hire the people I want to. And if it doesn't work with that agency, we have a way to go outside the agency to look for people.
That's great. How else is it different for providers? Well, you have to individualize the program and tailor it to the participant. I know that all of you here, the CCLN folks, do that anyway. But that is actually not the way it is in most of the traditional systems. So that's going to be different for providers. As I mentioned, fewer written reports. You may be working with independent facilitators, which I think is a great advantage. Sometimes individuals or families have a hard time articulating what it is that they need or how they can be helped. And the independent facilitator can sometimes be that conduit between you and the family. So that's very helpful. I mentioned that you have to get new criminal background checks, and you have to follow the HCBS final rule. And you get to think outside the box. You get to be super duper creative, which is really fun.
Yeah, and I also think that when you change to self-determination, it's not client provider. You're the provider, the client. You are a partnership now. you are working together and you are looking to the client to say, this is what I need, this is how I need it. And I know that that is a shift, and it's not an easy shift, but I think in the end, you have more rewarding relationship with the people you work with. And it's more about the relationship than the rules and the regulations.
Exactly. I love that. More about relationships than rules. I love that. All right, so we're open for questions now. And as I mentioned, you can ask your question verbally by using the raise hand, or do you want to be our middle moderator, Mark, and go through the questions?
Yeah, Judy, Judy.
You can be our Ed.
Perfect. Julia Molly, thanks so much for all this information. Judy, I had actually compiled a list of questions and you've answered them all for me.
Wow.
I know. But I do see that we have some questions that have been put in the chat. And again, I apologize if these have already been answered, but I'm going to go through them as they came in. So our first question was, how does DOR VR services fit in with self-determination? Sometimes regional center will send supported individuals to DOR for employment services, but it has been my experience that DOR knows what to do with self-determination. Do you want to speak to how, like right now for employment services, anyone seeking employment services and anyone seeking to get a job, they're immediately referred to the Department of Rehabilitation before it's that generic resource. So Department of Rehabilitation needs to do their prep, intake prep, placement and retention type billing through the Department of Rehabilitation. Once the person's stable in their job, that case will get transferred from DOR back to Regional Center for ongoing services, ongoing funding for employment services. In the self-determination program, I would imagine that they could skip that generic resource step of having to go to DOR.
You can't.
Okay.
You still have that generic resource. However, it's all in the way you talk about it. So if you're looking for like a job that DOR, so if you lay out in your person-centered plan that you want a job to work at a restaurant, that's like a classic thing that DOR prepares people for. Or you want to work as a janitor, they always, it's the same, I can't remember, somebody has this great expression of the crap that they're always the same three kinds of things. It's like cleaning things up and serving things. And, so if that's the kind of job that's in your person-centered plan, that's going to definitely trigger a generic resource where you have to go to the DOR first. But if your person-centered plan, it is that you want to do some volunteer work, you want to start a company, you want to do, you want to be a public speaker, all these kinds of things. There's no way that DOR is going to help you with that. Then you could kind of skip over that. I can tell you that in my son's person-centered plan, my son cannot have traditional employment at all. He can't really have a regular job. And so, we have some sort of pre-planning of some, thinking about a small business that we may start for him. No one ever said go to DOR. First of all, DOR doesn't take hard cases. Like they're like, oh, you've got a behavior, we will not even talk to you. You will not be allowed in our system. So, there's certainly ways to get around that trigger, but yeah, if you're looking for traditional kind of employment that DOR would normally help you with, you got to still use them.
It goes back to that, call it something different, right?
Yeah.
And in like my spending budget, like I would write a children's book. So under employment, I have the ability to hire a consultant to help me write a children's book. Or another thing is looking at starting my own nonprofit, like talking to professionals that can give me advice. That's in my plan. So it's the way you write your goals is how you can spend your funding.
I appreciate that question. It certainly has made accessing a chosen way of life of getting a job more complex for people because they now have to have another case manager, another case opened, all that stuff. So it's interesting to hear how that might be different in self-determination. Next question is about purchasing a van. Is that something that's allowable in the in the budget, individual budget?
It is not, although you wouldn't know that yet because DDS has yet to put out the directive on this. But since I'm on their sort of advisory group, I know that there is a directive in the works around automobiles, as well as home. You cannot purchase a home, you cannot pay rent. So there are certain things off the table: rent, mortgage, food, automobile purchases. So these are like standard things. What you can do though with a van, you can't purchase the van, but you can buy the van and then you can use funding to modify the van like you can in the traditional system. So you could put a wheelchair ramp in, you could, if you want to drive, but you need some special tools to do that. Same thing with a house. You cannot pay rent or an apartment or a house or a mortgage. But you can reconfigure the house so that it helps you with your disability. It has to be related to your disability. So things like widening doorways for wheelchairs, or putting bars in the showers, or even, I believe, I haven't seen this yet, but I believe even like if you live in a place and you want to put up a wall to have room for staff to be able to spend the night and create another bedroom, I believe that would even be allowed, because that is directly related to your disability and your person-centered plan. But not like, I just want new carpeting in my house and it's really cool. There's also going to be some rules around repairs. So can you repair a car? So if you're repairing the wheelchair ramp, yes. But if you're just doing an oil change or you have a flat tire, no. So just kind of general repairs related to cars and homes, general repairs of the home are not going to be allowed. But let's say you have a person that I happen to know in my own home that breaks the toilet sometimes. If that becomes an issue, obviously a typical 24-year-old is not breaking the toilet all the time. That's something that you could put that kind of repair as a budget line item in your budget, but not, and also other things like a security system. You may want to put cameras in to watch, whatever it is. Those things are definitely allowed.
Okay, so this is Elizabeth with me.
Hi, Elizabeth.
The rights advocate for going, and I'm supposed to be in self-determination, but I find it, when you said you can't purchase a van, but you could purchase a ramp or make accommodations in the van.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like, I don't know, you're still in that, sorry, you're still in that box of the state telling you what you can and cannot do with your life. So I feel like this, even though it says you can have a real life of your children, I still feel like self-determination is wrapped up in a pretty box with a pretty bow that says this year, you're like, but you still have to follow all these rules. So
Yeah.
until we really get the state to recognize that we're real people with real life, I'm not buying into this. I don't
Yeah.
see it.
So Elizabeth, I mean, and Molly chime in as well. You are not wrong. Saying that the self-determination program right now is not where it should be is an understatement. It is what we spend every freaking day talking about and advocating for. And I see people's hesitation because they're not seeing that they're having true freedom even when they get into the self-determination program. And I say this all the time. One of the things I forgot to mention is that each regional center has a local advisory committee that is supposed to be providing oversight of the implementation of the self-determination program at that regional center. The problem is that they are not doing their job in a lot of places. They are afraid to have conflict with their regional center staff. And that their role as laid out in the statute is not being implemented correctly. And so I always say, like, those principles that Molly went through at the beginning, they're not just like fluff. They're very thoughtful and real. And you have to be able to say, as a participant, family member, the oversight committee, regional center staff, service providers, is every single day those principles being fulfilled for that individual? And if they are not, that means there's something wrong with the self-determination program. So I kind of 100% agree with you, but Elizabeth, I really, really hope that you would go into the SDP, because you would be a great advocate within the system like Molly is and help us fight for that freedom and authority that we want to have. So we're gonna get you in. Molly and I are gonna twist your arm over the next few months and hoping to get you in.
Yeah, we also have to realize that this is federal dollars. It's all, as Judy said, it's our money, but there also, as we in the program, we have to make sure we're using our funding in the most appropriate way. And, you know, as a lot of people say, well, my goal is to travel. Well, that's not a goal about your disability, and it didn't fit the regulations of being funded. So I understand with the frustration about one area, but I could say overall, self-determination is a lot more flexible and freer. You might not get everything you want, but you do get a lot more quality of life and how you want to live your life. So if you're just saying, well, I won't get one thing, so I don't want to go in, and you're denying yourself like a lot more that you could get, I would relook at that and really say, well, I might not get it now, but maybe later it will change and I can buy a car or something like that.
I'm not saying I'm not going in. I'm just saying, since I'm the right advocate for the regional center, and my job is to advocate for everybody in that regional center, and if I can't get to the two other offices without paying out of pocket for a taxi and or paratransit that we all know isn't reliable. And I wanted a van so I can have one of my staff drive me where I have to go. If I can't use my self-determination dollars to purchase a van, how, excuse my language, how the hell does that mean self-determination?
Well, can I
and
just say, I have a budget in my self-determined. It's a pretty good amount for transportation. And I have found private transportation that, because I'm in a scooter, now it's not cheap by any means, but there is ways to put money in for transportation so you can get to your meetings and that kind of stuff. And it doesn't mean you need to have your own vehicle. But maybe we should move on.
Yeah, I was going to say, Liz, that Judy fights to take barriers down in the self-determination program every single day. And I'm happy to hear that Judy's interested in connecting with you further, because I think you can both be a great resource for each other. So I will work after this to continue to connect Elizabeth and Judy together. So thank you.
I love talking to Judy.
Right?
Thanks, Elizabeth. Me
Me
too.
too. The next question was about generic resources. I feel like we really, that you really maybe covered that a little bit later after this question came in. So Lauren, if you have additional, please raise your hand.
No, Judy answered it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Lauren. The next question, what have you seen, Molly and Judy, that providers have done to support individuals in self-determination that you would consider to be best practices or tips that you would recommend for other providers?
That's a really phenomenal question. And in fact, that's going to be a new slide the next time I do this presentation.
See, we're helping you too, Judy.
Yeah, thank you. That is an excellent question. So, you know, I'll start by being very honest. Very few traditional service providers have embraced the self-determination program. So I'm not going to sit there and say, oh my God, there's just hundreds of you out there who are doing this. It's impossible to have a best practice at this point because there's so few. Now, remember that self-determination is not only in California. It exists in some form in all 50 states. For people with developmental disabilities, it exists in a lot of states. We're not alone. We're quite behind. We are also, by the way, this is not new. I forgot to mention, self-determination has been around as a pilot in 5 regional centers since 1998. So we have about 200 people around the state who've been in it for a long time, some of whom use traditional service providers. You know, what I would say is this, is that everything you know about working with a regional center needs to be thrown out. Like, you need to literally throw that out. Stop using terminology from the traditional system. So don't use the word respite. Like, people without disabilities don't hire someone to provide respite. If they're a kid, they hire a babysitter. If they're an adult, they have a support staff, or they have an aide, or they have a driver, or they have a social coordinator. We have people on my staff who we're calling community integrators. So don't, take out all the lingo that exists in the traditional system and throw that out. Then stop using terms like rates, and say, honestly, what would it cost us to provide this kind of, service for this individual? And what kinds of cool things can we do that we've never been able to do before? And I think that it would be really important for you to start by reading the person's person-centered plan. So let's say somebody comes to you and says, I'm interested in talking to you about providing this particular service. Say, oh, would you be willing to let me read your person-centered plan? Because usually if they're actually talking to service providers, their plan's done already. And now they're at the point where they're trying to assign providers to meet these goals. And so you want to hear what their goals are and start with them individually, and to meet some of their other people on their team and to know who's their natural supports. And I mean, these are the really cool things that you get to talk about is what are some creative ways we can meet your goals? So let's say you provide employment services. A really good example of something that happened in self-determination is that there was a man who they had no idea what he wanted to be, what he wanted to do, and he didn't communicate very well exactly where what he could do for employment. But they knew that every day he would love to walk down to the corner near his house where there was an auto mechanics place, and he would literally sit there for hours and watch them fix cars. That, to me, his behavior showed that he has an intense interest in cars. So the independent facilitator went over and met with the owner of the little shop and said, do you know that man who comes over and watches you? Oh yeah, I know him. And we waved to him. It's like, we're having a person-centered plan for him. Would you be willing to go to his person-centered plan? We'll give you a free meal. He shows up. He sees this guy. This guy's super cool. I see this guy every day. And they ended up hiring this man at the auto mechanic store to be his mentor. So now he's making money on top of fixing a car. He's like sitting there going, here's what I'm doing. Let me mentor you. And eventually this guy started doing volunteer work a bit at the auto mechanic store, and eventually he got hired. And while he may not have been fixing complicated things for cars, he was in a place that he loved, and he was in a place that he was able to make a contribution to this company. And so, these are it's a way of being, thinking about there's no restrictions on how you can help people achieve their hopes and dreams. And the regional center is not going to come down on you because that wasn't in your, don't you guys have to do like a service plan, or you have to, whenever you're starting a service, you have to create some sort of like long service plan? And so it's like, no, there's none of those things. Everything is written by the individual, and it's their person-centered plan that you're going off of, not something that you have to write.
I would go back to getting away from seeing this as a contractual what I'm trying to say is try to move away from the client provider. We serve you. We help you to, you're a human being. You have a lot to offer, but you need support. How can we support you so you can live your best life? I think it's not that we don't need you. We need support. I need support. I need people who can help me. But it's not like we're here to help you to just, do what we say and we're in charge. It's how can you live your life the best way, and what do we need to do to help you? That is a new dynamic that's hard to think about, but I think in the long run will be such a better way of running organizations.
Thanks. Thank you, Molly. Judy, there's a couple of comments and questions that have come out. Will you just take a brief moment to plug your SDP Connects webinars?
Yeah, absolutely. So we meet generally every Wednesday. We've actually taken off the last 2 weeks for the Jewish holidays, but we're meeting again this coming Wednesday. And we meet for about an hour and a half. We get a couple of hundred people on to all of our meetings. I mean, it's hugely well attended. And we sometimes have guest speakers. We usually have a presentation for the first half hour to 45 minutes. And then we take questions, mostly or usually from family members and self-advocates. But sometimes they're from regional centers, sometimes they're from service providers, where we really break down the self-determination program. So if you go to our website, and I see that Mark put our website on the chat, if you go in there, you scroll down and you'll see a little advertisement for our self-determination interchange. So on our interchange, you have the opportunity to read everything possible about the self-determination program. And also we have a forum where you can connect with other people. But we also have the videos of all of our previous SDP Connects that we've had over the last 14 months. We're actually starting over from the beginning of what the SDP is. We started that about 4 or 5 weeks ago. And so you can see, like, we do SDP 101, like what is it, what generally is it, and then we really dig deep into certain areas. So I'd encourage you to watch some of those videos and learn a bit about the various, it'll dig deeper into like unmet need and dig deeper into, services and supports and things like that.
And another question that came through is what can someone do if they're running into problems with the regional center approving the plan or trying to micromanagement? Is there
it's really, really hard. There are a couple of good things that happened in the budget that came out of the budget for the self-determination program, the state budget. One of them is that there's funding to create an office of the ombudsperson for the self-determination program. It's the first ombudsperson ever for the DD system. And by the way, we were really hoping that it would be an ombudsperson for the whole system and not just for the less than 1% of people in the self-determination program, but for a range of reasons that got pulled out of the budget. But we're hopeful that it'll actually expand in the next year or two to the full system. But in the meantime, participants or others can certainly be reaching out to this ombudsperson when that office starts, which is probably early next year, to be honest. So what do you do in the meantime? I would definitely appeal any sort of micromanaging that they've done up the chain, like ask to speak to if it's your service coordinator, ask to speak to their supervisor. It's usually, the service coordinators are completely uneducated and have no freaking clue what they're doing. Almost all the decisions at the regional centers are being made by more senior level people right now. So unfortunately, it's a little hard to appeal above them because sometimes it's like the associate executive director is making these decisions. So if that's actually the case, there's two options. Number one is you can so people in the self-determination program retain all the same rights to due process that people in the traditional system have. And you can certainly file for a fair hearing. I know a number of people who've gone to fair hearing with not good results. And the reason is because the Office of Administrative Hearings, the OAH that runs the fair hearings, have no clue what the self-determination program is. We've been begging DDS, who are responsible to train them on it, to do some training, and they have yet to do it. It's so outrageous. And so we've had OAH administrative law judges say at hearings, is the self-determination program a real thing or is that in your imagination? Like they literally did not know what it was. And there is a real close connection between the judges and the regional centers. And so they'll just be like, well, the regional centers have got to be right on this. So we're going to rule with the regional centers. So that's been a very frustrating thing. And we're hoping to correct that with the Office of the Ombudsperson. But in addition to that, there's another way you could go, and that is to the local advisory committees. Who are supposed to be providing oversight. Now, as I said before, many of them are afraid to challenge their regional center. People are highly conflicted. They're afraid of retribution. They've told me that to my face. I can't say that to the regional center staff because my son's budget would get cut. And so they're willing to sacrifice the greater program because of what's going on with their, to protect their own child. So that's very, very frustrating to me. However, it can be done. If you show up on a regular basis, the meetings are generally monthly. And if you show up on a regular basis, you've heard it from other people, encourage them to show up as well. I go to a lot of these meetings and I listen to what's happening. I can tell you that if you serve consumers at the at South Central Regional Center, it's a complete and utter waste of your time to try to get to that committee, because the committee is completely ineffectual and has said to me, we're not going to hold our regional center accountable, so don't even try to make us. And but I would say that that's a rare case. I would say in most cases you have advisory committee members who have the best of intentions. They may not know how to provide that oversight, but they really want to try. And so you will hear from people that they want to be able to provide that accountability, and they're required by law to have public comment at the meeting, so you will have a chance to be able to make a case. That's my suggestion.
And I think even before you get to like doing, going to local boards, is you need to know what you're doing. You need to understand what the self-determination plan is. You need to know the steps. This is an awesome book that Judy talked about, but I think the more the individual or the family knows what it's all about, create timelines, really understand what their role is, what the role of the regional center is, and kind of really advocate for yourself. I think that's very helpful. So you don't run into having to go to hearings that delay your going into self-determination for months, and it's also advocating for a timely plan. Some people are waiting 6 to 8 months to do their whole plan. It shouldn't take more than 4 months to put everything together and to be ready to go. So you have to know what you're doing so you can advocate for yourself too.
Thank you, Molly. Couple of questions about the background check again, Judy. Can you just recap that for us?
Yeah, so I saw that. Yeah, I know that you've already gone to LiveScan and you've already gotten your background check. I don't know why they're making you do it again. And by the way, you may be an IHSS worker and you have to go and do it again from the same LiveScan. So it is something, honestly, we probably spent 2 years talking about this from 2014 to 2016, and this is where DDS came out. So yes, so you're going to find this out from the FMS. The FMS will tell you, yes, you need to, here is the way you need to get your background check, and it needs to be sent to this particular agency, and they will help you. That's where you'll get that information.
Judy, can you talk a little bit about insurance, liability, workers' compensation, that kind of stuff when somebody is hiring their own employees and not necessarily going through traditional services?
That's a great question. So I talked about the different FMS models. So there's the FMS model called co-employer, where you are basically paying the FMS to provide all those kinds of things like the workers' comp and liability insurance. Believe me, it's not free. They charge the individual budget for it, but they take care of it all. And it's more expensive that way. You can use the sole employer model where you arrange for that yourself. You can also, by the way, in the sole employer model, purchase it through the FMS for all that money. or if you have renter's insurance or homeowner's insurance, oftentimes that liability insurance and workers' comp is part of your homeowner's insurance. I know it is with us, so it ends up saving your budget a lot of money. The reason why we in our family prefer the sole employer over the co-employer model is because we want to have complete choice and control over the people that we hire. And in the co-employer model, the FMS can put a lot of controls on you. They can say this person had a drunk driving arrest on their record. They were never convicted, but the fact that they were arrested and not convicted makes us uncomfortable and you can't hire them. Or they could also say things like, if we're the employer of record, they're never allowed to drive you anywhere. Like we have a policy where we do not pay for people to drive you. And of course, you need to be driven. That's the whole point of having staff. So we believe in the sole employer model where we have the complete choice and control. But I know a lot of people use co-employer because they don't have that insurance that they need, and it's just easier for them to deal with it that way, and they're willing to pay more to do it. Oh, you're muted.
So as a sole employer, you do have to get your own workers' comp, your own insurance, your own liability, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so for us, it's just part of our homeowners insurance. We had to make no special arrangements. We've always had that because we've always had staff that we've paid out of our own pocket in our home. So we've always needed to have that kind of insurance for the staff.
Gotcha.
By the way, if you all have a housekeeper that comes into your home, if you all have a babysitter that comes into your home, you better have this kind of stuff too. I mean, this is not just for people with disabilities. Your housekeeper could break their arm and sue you. So you make sure that if you have a housekeeper, you have some sort of liability insurance policy for them, and it's that same insurance policy because it only works for them when they're in your home, right? If they trip and fall at a restaurant, it's the restaurant's liability insurance there. But if they hurt themselves on the job because of the job, that's the workers' comp, which is also part of most people's homeowners insurance.
And then looks like the last question here is regarding rental assistance.
Yeah, I saw that. That's a painful question. So for people who are ineligible, so rent cannot be provided except for the health and safety of the individual at the discretion of the executive director of a regional center. Very, very few people get to take advantage of this. It's a handful of, I don't know exactly how many, I'd love to know, but it's not a lot of people. Often they're undocumented people, so they don't have access to SSI. Sometimes there are people who have a health and safety waiver, and therefore in the kind of place that they were living in or that they could afford to live in, it was not adequate for their health and safety. And so they needed to have at least a little bit of a subsidy. We have been begging DDS to include these folks. I personally have a friend who's in this category who desperately wants to be in self-determination and cannot because of the health subsidy that they get. So there was an effort in the HCBS spending plan. If those, I know Mark knows what that is, but not all of you may. I mean, there was this extra federal money that the state of California received, and the DDS had a specific way that they wanted to spend that money that included a statewide ombudsperson and included rental subsidies for people, including for the self-determination program. And that money did not get authorized because that money ended up going to rate increases, quite honestly. So that money's not in there. And unfortunately right now, but it is something we're going to continue to push for in the future.
Wonderful. Well, Julie and Molly, thank you guys so much for your time today. We've really appreciated it. I know, again, so many of our members were asking questions. So hopefully this gave an opportunity to get some of those questions answered. Judy mentioned when she first started, what a wonderful collaboration CCLN and DVU have had. I had that in my closing, but you're still my thunder there.
Sorry.
And, you know, just want to say that it's just been such an amazing collaboration. You are an advocacy ally for CCLN, and hopefully we are the same for you. Certainly look forward to working with you on supportive decision making and replacing conservatorship.
Somebody's meowing.
Somebody's meowing.
I muted the meower.
Thank you. So again, thank you guys so much for your time. We certainly want to announce our next month's monthly member meetup. Our CCLN diversity subcommittee has been working really hard on a training series for our membership. And we are looking forward to having our first part of a series of diversity trainings in our next monthly member meetup for October with Dr. Jeremiah Percy, who will lead us in the very first of our diversity training series. So members, keep an eye out for a calendar invite to that. So again, Molly and Judy, just really so pleased to have you guys with us today to share about self-determination. We're excited to continue to learn more, and we may ask you back.
Thank you. Hoping you will all embrace it and start supporting people in the self-determination program. And thank you, Mark, for inviting us.
It was really helpful. Okay, folks, that's a wrap. Thanks so much for your time, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.